Looking into the RotoViz Overtime Crystal Ball and see what is going to happen in the 2023 NFL season. We're going to talk through, Shawn, what we believe will happen and what we hope will happen, and maybe throw in some scorching takes along the way. So I'm looking forward to this one. We have made it, Shawn, to pretty much the eve of the NFL season. If you're listening to this, we'll have already had Thursday Night Football. We're recording this before that kicks off, so we're excited to see what happens. I know Shawn is ready to see what his Kansas City Chiefs are all about in 2023 and if they can retain that Super Bowl trophy at the end of the season. But I'm excited, Shawn. It's been a long off-season. It's been a fun off-season, and I kept mentioning that we wouldn't know as time flew by how quick the season would be here. We sit now, and it feels like it's come too quick. It's already here, but we are excited for it.
Oh, man, I can't wait. This might be the most excited I've been in the last decade. And Colm,
I think this is the most excited. Like, there's times over the last, especially kind of 3 days, where I've been pretty hyped that the season is here.
Yeah, we don't have a hard time getting excited. So if we're more fired up than usual, hopefully week one here will deliver for us.
We always say it's the best time of the year, but all those other times that I said it, I didn't feel the adrenaline rush thinking about the season that I feel at this moment in time. So I'm excited. Maybe it's those last couple of drafts, Shawn, that we were squeezing in before the season started that really feel like they are going to bring home all the money in 2023. Maybe that's what's done it. But we're ready to kick off here. What direction? Shawn knows the show sheet, but what way do you want to do it? The last call I'm going to do is intro music. Send me your suggestions for which players need to be in there for the 2023 edition. I will be updating it over the next week or so, so send them my way on Twitter at Overtime Ireland or email them across at rotovizradio@gmail.com. Shawn, which way are we kicking off today's show?
Well, you have who is the 2024 101. Who do you have?
I think this is a kind of a cheat of an answer. I think, the top two are going to be the same guys again. I think we are going to see Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase continue their, I'm going to say, historic start to their careers. And those guys are leading the way again. Usually, Shawn, when we're looking at number one, number two, over the last bit of time, we've had either running backs or more veteran receivers. But these guys they are still on the ascent. And if their ascent continues, I can't see them sliding back down by ADP.
Well, I'm going to throw out a couple of crazy answers. These aren't going to be the most likely.
Shawn, Sam Howell can't be the 101 in regular.
No, it's not going to be Sam Howell. He may be the answer to another question here in a moment, but I'm going to throw out a couple of dark horse candidates. The first one is going to be a running back who people have bid up into the 2-3 turn, and yet is very controversial going there. I'm going to say look for Jahmyr Gibbs and the potential for him to have a 70 reception season that then puts him in the conversation as the next Christian McCaffrey, the next Austin Eckler, and certainly as those guys get a little bit older and fantasy managers are desperate for a running back play that will give them the ability to accomplish the running back objectives, which is to score in that 25 point per game range. Look for Gibbs to be potentially in the mix. Obviously, he's someone who could also fall. The other name I think that we have to consider here is the beneficiary of your guy. If Aaron Rodgers can get up there and win a fifth MVP, if he can win a third bogus MVP, somehow outvote getting Patrick Mahomes, who will be the obvious clear-cut choice for that award.
Shawn is happy that Aaron Rodgers has won those MVPs. 4 of them.
4 of them. If that happens, and I think that the revenge tour is very possible, then Garrett Wilson is going to be in the mix at the 101.
The revenge tour is very possible. I'm going to put this out here now that the MVP is not going to happen this year. I don't think that level of performance remains, but I think with what you're saying, along with Garrett Wilson. I don't think you need an MVP-like season from Rodgers. You just need, a strong season from him. So I'm on board with both of those. And just for, again, we are recording this one before Thursday Night Football. So, Shawn, if it's a case that Gibbs has already kicked things off and, has 7 receptions for 80 yards in the first game with 2 touchdowns, Shawn has predicted this ahead of time.
Well, and this is also one where I could see this being that Kareem Hunt rookie season
against the Patriots
game where he goes off in such a big way that Gibbs is drafted in the top 5 picks tomorrow and Saturday. We're going to have a lot of FFPC main events, a lot of FFPC Fantasy Pros, especially that Fantasy Pros contest is looking at some overlay. So, obviously your chances of winning the $1 million are going to stay in the same basic range, but it gets a little better. And so, Colm, somebody has to win that $1 million. And listeners to OT have been doing quite well in the last couple of years. So it could be you. Think about jumping in there. Those post Thursday night drafts are a lot of fun. Those are some of my favorites. The flip side of that is I wouldn't be surprised in week 1 if we get the performance from David Montgomery, where he goes in round 2 over the next couple of days. So again, we're recording this not knowing, and you can sound silly. I think that Gibbs could go anywhere from 30 points to just 3 or 4. That's how wide the range is for him in week 1. I do think as the season goes along that by the time we're getting to 2024 101 discussions, week 1 is going to be forgotten, unless it's just magical, but it's going to be forgotten. It's going to be that week 9, week 10, and then specifically week 15, 16, 17. If he's scoring, if he goes on one of those postseason runs where you get almost 100 points in the 3 weeks from your RB, then, that's going to put him right there when we're talking about 2024 101.
So he may factor into this as well. Shawn, I have put this down as the rushing touchdown leader for the NFL. So just rushing. So you're talking a lot about receiving with Gibbs. I want to set the over-under at 18.5. So do we get somebody over 18.5 rushing touchdowns on the season? And if so, who is it? So again, this may be a little bit of a cheap answer, but I'm going with the rushing leader at the end of the season being Christian McCaffrey. I think just everything's set up in that offense for him to smash again. And we want to have a fun season. What I want more than anything this year is to get back to higher scoring, shootouts, more points, because that was the downside of kind of the early portion of last season. So I have to go with the over, which probably I think more I would say over a combined rushing and receiving, but we've gone here just for rushing. So who is it? Is there somebody that can beat out CMC here?
Yes, there is. I don't know if we have much chance of going over 18, as I'm looking in the RotoViz screener for the last, seasons from this century, and looking specifically through week 17, because obviously most of those players did not get the 17th week. We only have the 5 seasons, and we don't have a season after 2006. So it's going to be a challenge. The odds are going to be that it's under. And yet, a name I want to throw out as a possible over is a guy who we've been drafting because he just is so impressive as a big back out there catching passes. His peripherals over his first 2 years in the league have been extremely impressive. He's in an offense that should be upgraded. And if he somehow loses goal line touches to Ezekiel Elliott, we're going to be throwing things at the TV screen. I'm going to say Rhamondre Stevenson leads the NFL in rushing touchdowns.
I think I made a bold prediction about Stevenson at one point last season, but it didn't come true. So maybe Shawn is on this season forward. Excited for Stevenson's season, and hopefully not too many devices or TVs get broke throughout the course of this season. Shawn, moving into one that, again, you mentioned Gibbs. He factors into this for me for the rookie that makes the biggest fantasy impact this season. So there's one name here that, Shawn, we're hoping that makes a big impact, and that is JSN. And now that the reports are coming out that possibly will factor in even in week 1 and he's not going to miss those opening periods of the season, I was kind of thinking maybe we get an Odell Beckham season where he misses 4 weeks to kick things off and then tears it up. But I think Gibbs factors in there for everything that you said. And the other player I want to mention, and you mentioned on our Start Sit show this week about Mostert and him having the opportunity. Positive reports coming out with A-Chain and his recovery from injury and his potential availability. I think if things break right for him as the season goes on, and if he can factor into being the lead running back in that offense, the potential for him to be I'll go for a top 5 round draft pick in 2024 is there for me.
I like those selections, and certainly we anticipate or desperately hope for JSN to have a strong season. That Odell Beckham call is so much fun because Beckham's season, when you consider that he missed the first 4 games, that he didn't go on to be one of the all-time greats is stunning. And it's just unfortunate that
he did over the early portion of his career was, kind of derailed then at that point.
Well, his second year was also fantastic, but even separate from the injuries, he had started to not really contribute in the same way, which was unfortunate. Certainly, if you were chasing that early career production, it's unusual for a guy just to be that good and not go on to be a Calvin Johnson, not go on to be a Julio Jones type of player. I'm going to go a different direction with this question and say the biggest fantasy impact is going to be one that is not priced in. And certainly if JSN has a Beckham type season, that's not priced in. But the more reasonable JSN types of seasons are at least priced in from the perspective of, you're still hoping to outperform ADP, but it's by a couple of rounds. It's not with a guy who's going to be a top 5 pick next season. I think that Shawn Tucker is going to be the biggest rookie fantasy impact because he's essentially free, even though he has gotten trendier in the last week. And if you end up being the starting running back and you bring a fantasy-friendly profile, and I think that Tucker does that because he has the ability to both catch passes and break some plays there, and he has the big play ability as a runner. If you end up being the starting running back, after the first month of the season, for a team that I think is going to be better for fantasy than people realize, better, I think, than like the teams that have the rookie QBs, for example, because Baker Mayfield is not a player you can win with, but he's a player that you can move the ball with. And so it's almost like a poor man's Jameis Winston or a poor man's Ryan Fitzpatrick type of environment. And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, I don't really want a lesser performer than those two guys, but a player who can move the ball in an environment where you're going to have a lot of, dome matchups, you're going to have a lot of good weather matchups, you're going to have a lot of incompetence fueled shootouts, you're going to have a lot of garbage time points. Unlike some of the other bad offenses, I think that this offense will create some fantasy points. If those go to Shawn Tucker as the Bucs starting running back, he will be the biggest rookie impact player in fantasy.
The next one, Shawn, I think could be a very quick one. It's a second-year player who makes the biggest fantasy impact. Maybe this does factor in that we do get a Sam Howell answer, but I think that it has to be Garrett Wilson.
Well, since I've already made the case for Wilson being the potential 101 next year, I do think that we have to mention Sam Howell here. But let's go a different direction and say that it's a guy in that offense who benefits from Howell being a little better than people expect. Jahan Dotson massively overperforms his price. He's the guy who makes the jump, and you get a double-digit touchdown season, and he definitively takes over the number 1 role there from Terry McLaurin.
We're going to have a little bit of fun. This can be pretty rapid fire as we go through it. And it's going to be who is the highest scorer in PPR with some of the players who are both on the same offenses and are going close together by ADP. We're going to start off with the 49ers, Shawn. It's Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. Obviously, we're taking this is ADP is not the consideration. It's who scores the most points in 2023.
Well, I have it close. I think both guys are going to outperform ADP. I'm still going to give the slight edge to Debo, who has so many different ways to score points.
Yeah, I agree. Debo's season 2 years ago was pretty magical when we're talking about special seasons, and I think that the 49ers will have a pretty special season as a whole this year, and I do think that Samuel gets linked in. I think it's going to be pretty much impossible down near the goal line to stop those guys when you get McCaffrey in the mix, those two guys, and then you're putting Kittle in there as well. So it should be pretty good if Purdy can keep that all ticking over. We get Deontay Johnson and George Pickens. Some of these are like you mentioned, the last one being close. I think these are all going to be pretty close. It's going to be pretty close calls. This one is really touch and go. I think the breakout side says Pickens. The volume play says Johnson. So I'm going with Pickens, though. Have to go for the breakouts.
I think both of these guys also beat ADP, although it's gotten more challenging. Colm, these two players were very heavily in my best ball portfolio until the last 3 weeks, where they moved up into a range where they're competing with a lot of other trendy names. So hopefully all that early exposure will get some of those early teams across the finish line. It's just, as you mentioned, it's so challenging because the profiles are so extreme on opposite ends of the spectrum there, where Johnson is going to have 1 billion underneath targets, could lead the NFL in targets. Pickens could lead the NFL in touchdowns. You want to see him earn some more targets. I'm also going to go Pickens.
Up in Seattle, we have, I know some people want to add Tyler Lockett into this, but I think it's DK Metcalf and JSN for who's going to be the alpha up there. And if we look at DK Metcalf and his physique, he certainly looks like an alpha. We have a situation where who scores the most points this season. Again, this is very close for me, but we have to continue to be bold here, Shawn, and I'm going to go with JSN.
Well, I'm going to go JSN, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf in that order.
So you're going to have Lockett outscoring Metcalf as well?
Yes.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you on that. I'll have a JSN, DK Metcalf, and Tyler Lockett. I just think that, again, we're talking about offenses who should be very exciting. I think people are on board with what Seattle are going to do. They also have, obviously, very talented running backs. Yeah, put Geno into what he did last year. I just hope that Seattle, we talked on our last draft that we did about the worst case scenario for all these things. And the worst case scenario for Seattle would be if Geno Smith, the Cinderella story, if he turns back into a pumpkin. That would be the worst case scenario here. So
that would be the worst case. Almost as bad would be the team deciding they want to grind out wins behind Zach Charbonnet. That's something else.
That may be the worst case scenario. We want to keep, hopefully, Shawn, just check before Sunday that you have your warranty on your TV setup. We have Baker Mayfield down in Tampa. We have Chris Godwin. We have Mike Evans. I'm going to go straight up here and go for Chris Godwin. I just think that at this point of his career, and Mike Evans has continued to get 1,000-yard seasons, has continued to be a terrific wide receiver. But I think in this offense, what Evans does and what Mayfield can do may not match up particularly perfectly. And I think Godwin is more of the player here to get the volume in this offense.
We have had some seasons in the past where the sort of niche vertical receiver was the best fit for Baker Mayfield. And yet I would agree with you that being able to manufacture touches to Godwin, something that they definitely did to an extreme under Tom Brady, but you open that up a little bit more. The fact that Godwin has such a multifaceted profile makes him the pretty easy call.
McLaurin and Dotson for the Commanders. I've been a big fan of McLaurin for his entire time in the NFL. Came in, started off hot, has looked really strong throughout it. Now potentially getting maybe the best offense and could potentially be the best quarterback that he's going to play with. I know we're more optimistic on Howell than a lot of people, but it feels like he is, if we're looking at the apex of a career, he's on the trajectory on the way down, but Dotson is really about to have some rocket fuel here and push himself up into one of the higher end wide receivers in the NFL. And I think this is one for me that is quite clear where the expectation, and I know ADP has changed with the McLaurin injury. over the last couple of weeks. But at the start of the offseason, McLaurin has been viewed as the wide receiver 1, Dotson the wide receiver 2. I think this is one that a couple of weeks in, and certainly by the end of the season, will have people will be on board that the consensus wide receiver 1 is Dotson in this offense.
Yeah, we have a ton of Dotson. We don't have much McLaurin. I would just throw out that Dotson was a reach in the reality draft from a profile perspective. Now, he's looked good enough that I think if their general manager wants to argue that, they saw things that have turned out to be true and that they were right and that the profile was wrong, they could make that argument. But when you look at his profile coming out of college and you look at the fact that he didn't exactly draw targets at a super high rate last season. Now, part of that was because of injuries. He wasn't always healthy or always available during the stretch where you would really have expected him to start generating a lot of target volume at the expense of, say, McLaurin. The other thing is that McLaurin's profile is really good. You look at the air yards elements to it and the ability not just to draw targets, but to draw deep targets and to make some of those plays despite horrible quarterback performance. I think it's easy to just make the fun pick and get ahead of ourselves in terms of where these two guys are. Before the toe injury, there was a real possibility that McLaurin was the guy who made that jump into the round 2 range next year. So I would like to see both of these guys do well. I think it'll certainly help Dotson if McLaurin is healthy-ish and also plays to his capabilities. Certainly if you're on the Sam Howell bandwagon, you want Terry McLaurin to have a good year.
Yeah.
We're not going to get the Sam Howell production that we need to justify all of the talk all year if Terry McLaurin doesn't do kind of what he's done in the past, plus, more execution on some of the air opportunity. From that perspective, I almost want to say McLaurin just to bring all of these guys together up there to the top.
2 more, Shawn, to finish it off. And I'm going to tie them all in together because these are very, very close. But I'm going to lead to the number 1 by what we think now. So it's A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. And might seem like the easy answer, but I feel like Chase and Brown have to lead the way here, barring injury.
So you're just going to go with the main guys, are you?
Yeah.
Are we adjusting for the difference in price?
No.
Okay. Well, I think that we have to go with the superstars here. But one of the things that does tend to get lost because Higgins was limited for different stretches last season is that he went on a very, very long run where his numbers and Jamar Chase's numbers were almost completely equivalent.
Yep.
You're talking about more than a full season worth, right? Where the numbers were equivalent. And so when you look at the different prices there, the reason that you have so much T. Higgins is just because it's possible. Whereas if you want to get a lot of Jamar Chase, you just have to get a lot of 102s.
Yeah.
But even with that not being the situation, I think that you've got a great chance to outperform with a T. Higgins, whereas you're a little bit more limited in your chances of that with Jamar Chase. Now, with Jamar Chase, you have the chance for an astonishing season. And I don't think that you have that kind of historical type season or historic type season exactly in the range of outcomes for a T. Higgins. When we look at the Eagles, the efficiency numbers are just so extreme for both guys. But when you are talking about A.J. Brown, an edge in targets per route, a 1.5 edge in yards per target, which, people are going to say, we want to fade that portion of it, but you shouldn't. The weighted targets per route, again, a big edge to A.J. Brown. The target depth, an over 2-yard edge to A.J. Brown. His ability with the ball in his hands is elite. So with Brown, you're mostly just asking the question, how much overall volume is there going to be? Colm, for similar reasons, I have a ton of Devontae Smith and not much A.J. Brown. I think that Devontae Smith would probably need a nagging Brown injury to be competitive there. I could see both guys outperforming again, and I do expect the Philadelphia Eagles to be the most exciting offense of football.
And I actually forgot to add to the list, but Hill and Waddle, and I think it fits into a very similar part of the conversation. I do think that Smith, Higgins, and Waddle are probably our 3 favorite second wide receiver options on their offenses. But I think Waddle is the only one who may outscore his counterpart in Hill.
That's the way I've been playing it as well, and would pick it. The fact that Hill was so much more dynamic with the Dolphins last year than he was with Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs stands out to me as a little bit, not of a red flag. It is a great sign for him. It's a great sign for his coach and how well his coach schemed. It's a great sign for Tua. Triumph for all 3 of them. And yet when you're thinking about like Stephon Diggs and some of the things that he did with the Buffalo Bills after being traded from the Vikings, and you're like, okay, we're finally seeing the true Stephon Diggs. We've also subsequently seen how difficult it is to maintain that type of level. And when you have a young superstar behind you who really just needs to catch the ball a little bit better and to stay a little bit healthier, to be the next guy who, joins that mix of Jefferson, Chase, Garrett Wilson, CeeDee Lamb, that's where you can easily see a flip. Whereas seeing a flip in those other 2 offenses would be more surprising.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Moving on now, Shawn, Peyton Manning had the record for NFL touchdowns in 2013, 10 years ago, 55 in that season. I'm not going to go for 55. Do we see any quarterbacks with over 50 in 2023? I'm going to go with the simple answer, and I probably should have said this when we did the running back over, touchdowns. I should have just went with no, but I'm going with no here.
You're going with no. Well, you put these very high. I mean, you put them in a range where they would have to be.
I didn't want it to be simple. I think like over under, I would say 44 is probably where the realistic marker is. I think we'll have some guys over 40 this season, but getting up to 50 is quite tough.
Yeah, when you talk about getting over 50, and again, I've just cut this for 17, which now we do have an extra week, which makes it a big difference. Mm-hmm. But this century, we only have 10 guys who are even over 40. Now we have another handful who are at 40, but the difference between 40 and 55
is a lot.
Mammoth.
It's 15, Joe. It's 15.
It is 15. And I mean, when you think about what Peyton Manning did, and I mean, I think about one of the sort of luckiest / greatest teams that I ever drafted was one that I did draft after the first Thursday night game, where Peyton Manning had already demonstrated that he was going to have a magical season. And I was able to take him at 201 along with, I believe, Des Bryant. And then he goes on to throw for 55 touchdowns. And when you have Peyton Manning with 55 touchdowns and a 0 RB team that had guys like Des Bryant, Andre Johnson, Alshon Jeffrey, Josh Gordon, you've got the tight end, I believe, of Jimmy Graham in there, you score a lot of points.
2013 as well is the fabled Josh Gordon season. It is the one season where it all worked out for Josh Gordon. It
did all work out that year. So this one, even though there are fewer examples of this, I do, and we have this frustrating development where defenses are trying to slow things down, trying to make you execute a billion drives. Colm, I'd like to think that subsequent to our recording, Patrick Mahomes has gone out and put up a huge number despite the absence or the very limited performance from Travis Kelce in week 1. He threw for 50 touchdowns in 2018. He threw for 40 touchdowns last season in the first 17 weeks. He's got a shot in there. The names that we see coming up here are not surprising in that you have Drew Brees a couple of times, you have Aaron Rodgers a couple of times, you have Tom Brady with that 50 touchdown season in 2007 that is obviously one of lore. So that's the kind of year you're going to need to have. And I'm going to borrow from one of your subsequent answers and say that Joe Burrow does hit 50 touchdowns this year.
Okay, let's see what happens as it goes along. Shawn's spoiling maybe some of the potential upcoming answers here, but question is, do the Broncos and Russell Wilson bounce back? I think this is more does Russell Wilson bounce back, and the rest of the things then kind of tie in with that. So we get Cortland Sutton tied in, we get Dulcich having a nice season, we get the running backs having their options. So I think this will be one of the best things for fantasy this season if Wilson shows kind of similar to what he did in Seattle, and the Broncos are I was going to use the word competent, but if they're a good offense.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be like it was with Seattle, but I also don't think it's going to be like it was last year with that complete and total debacle.
And I think if it's like what it was, if it's like that after 6 weeks this year, I think Russell Wilson's not the quarterback anymore.
I completely agree. I think that we're going to see something very different than either of those two things. Russell Wilson wanted to prove that he could be something other than just this guy who plays kind of backyard football. And one of the things that we found is that if you play backyard football really well, that's a big weapon, even at the NFL level. I don't think that he can do that anymore, but I think that Sean Payton is the coach who can get competent QB play from him in a more normal environment where I don't think many coaches could. I also think people are going to be a little bit surprised about the caliber of his weapons. Look out for Marvin Mims coming at you.
So I'm hoping that is going to be the case here. We talked about for years in Seattle about why wouldn't they let Russ cook? Well, we know now why they didn't let him cook, but we'll see if he can microwave something in 2023. Shawn, this is one where we have to talk about our guys, players we have been drafting all offseason long. Who makes the leap? Sam Howell, Kenny Pickett, Desmond Ridder, and this guy may have already made the leap, but I guess can he maintain what he was able to show last year, and that is Brock Purdy. So we have 4 second-year quarterbacks. It doesn't have to be a one-off answer of one of these names, but come the end of the season, who are we going to say they are definitely the franchise quarterback here moving forward?
Well, Kenny Pickett was almost perfect in the preseason. He's got the weapons. He's very clearly ready to make the leap. I put together a pretty in-depth article looking at how the weapons matter for QBs who are looking to take this next step and who are looking to give you elite win rates. Pickett checks all of those boxes. I think he's the most clear-cut answer. I think that we want to temper our expectations for the first half of the year with Sam Howell and Desmond Ridder, with the answer there being, can they make the progression and can they avoid the big mistakes? Can they allow their offenses to work the way they're supposed to work and execute at a level that keeps everything rising, as opposed to have some huge stumbles to where we have these discussions every week of, are these guys going to make it? Are they going to get benched? Should they go to the backups? For them, I think it's a big win if that's not part of the conversation. And then I'm looking for them in the final third of the season to start to show off what they'll be as NFL QBs, which I think will be something special. And maybe not special, but at least very viable both for fantasy and for reality, where these teams will be able to say at the end of the year that they have found their quarterbacks of the future / their foundation piece.
I think from that list, the 3 that I'm the most confident in is Pickett, Howell, and Purdy. And the one that Ridder gives me a pause for concern. And it's not a real surprise when we look at how ADP is. I think a lot of people have that same pause for concern. Part of that for me is, Ridder himself, but the other part of that is how this offense is actually going to be run. And I'm hoping that, come week 1, then 2, then 3, that we're pleasantly surprised by how they are actually going to run the offense in Atlanta. That will be my hope, but I'm not overly confident in that being the case.
One thing I would throw out here would just be that I think the NFC South is so much weaker than these other 3 divisions that the pressure on him is going to be less. And I think that having that room to breathe is going to really help him.
I was looking at some predictions, where it's coming up on Twitter with different websites and that, doing their predictions for who's going to win what division. And I was very surprised just how many people were, going for the Falcons to win the division, which I was kind of surprised by. But we had a lot of Falcons and Saints in there. But you mentioned earlier with the Buccaneers, I think it'll be a lot lower win team that actually wins this division and the NFC South. So you could be correct there. One of the things, Shawn, we were very strong on last year was being able to pick some teams that people weren't in on yet, that were very, very undervalued, and then were able to go and produce in a, really kind of return on investment on their ADPs. The teams that I have down here, the Commanders, who we've talked about already, you've mentioned the Steelers, both with Pickett and the two wide receivers. They also have Firemouth there. There's a lot of talent on that offense, and a strong defense as well. So we have talked about those. The one that I want to throw out here is I think people are probably a little bit too down on the Titans for what they may be this year. I still think there's a strong chance that they win that division, and that would lead to a strong Derrick Henry season, a usable weeks from Ryan Tannehill. But I think both wide receivers and Hopkins and Burks, I think they're going to show out this year.
I love that Titans pick there. I don't know that we have any offenses that are quite as easy to pick as the Seahawks or the Lions, or that I would expect there to be as big a gap between the perception and the final results as what we got last season. But I do think that the Seahawks, again, when you're looking at Walker, and then perhaps Charbonnet is a little bit of a hedge, but when you're looking at Walker, when you're looking at JSN, and you're looking at Geno, there is still room for that offense to run a second time. Certainly when you're looking at these Lions players with Laporta and Jameson Williams as a stash and Jared Goff, you have room for the offense to run a second time. And then I'm going to throw out one here that you actually had on a topic that we're going to cut because of time constraints, but I think that the Las Vegas Raiders could be undervalued. And
well, for spoiler alert, I had them in the overvalued category that we've.
Colm had them in the overvalued category. I don't even think that they're valued at all. I don't notice anybody talking about them, right? I mean, they seem like the complete forgotten team. You have the Arizona Cardinals, who would be forgotten if they weren't such a train wreck that part of it is standing out. The Raiders are this forgotten, ultra boring team, and yet the prices that we're getting on Jacoby Myers and Michael Mayer are just really weird. I don't think that Jimmy Garoppolo is some kind of star. I do think that his actual numbers that are not just good, but are borderline elite, are the result of playing in certain offenses that are going to inflate any QB. But I also think that he's going into a good situation with undervalued weapons. So even if he's not a viable fantasy player with his profile, I think that some of his weapons are going to overperform. Certainly if you get that from a late tight end and you're in a format where tight end matters, that could be a big deal in 2023.
Last one now, Shawn. It is the MVP of the league and the Super Bowl winner. Shawn has given away my MVP. He's the 50 touchdown man. It is Joe Burrow. And with those 50 touchdowns, he is going to charge this team to the Super Bowl and win it. And obviously we talked a little bit earlier about Higgins and Chase. Just a lot of talent again on this roster, and excited to see what they can do this season when should be fully recovered. I'm saying fully recovered. He obviously had his calf issues over the last couple of weeks, but from that knee injury the year previous, Bengals for the Super Bowl, Burrow with 50 touchdowns for the MVP. You can't really say, Shawn, that Burrow is going to get 50 touchdowns earlier in the show and now not give him the MVP. As much as you don't want Aaron Rodgers to win the MVP this year, if Burrow has 50 touchdowns, Rodgers isn't going to catch him.
Well, let's say that Travis Kelce's knee injury does slow him down. And so the Chiefs are finally forced to go in a different direction. We got some positive feedback on the dreaming about Zach Evans being cut by the Rams, ending up with the Chiefs and doing something. Let's say that one of these interesting backs is cut by another NFL team, picked up by the Chiefs, and becomes a dynamic player for them. Maybe they work things out with Chris Jones or don't work things out with Chris Jones, and they are the team that picks up Jonathan Taylor. Really disappointed to find out that the stealth team in that trade discussion were the Green Bay Packers. That
I was also disappointed to hear that, Shawn.
Yeah. It's like, well, I mean, these teams doing crazy stuff. But here would be my thesis on this, is that you sometimes get players awarded at the wrong time because they've built up their legacy. If Patrick Mahomes throws for 45 touchdowns and leads the NFL in passing yards again, and he does it by elevating Rashee Rice and Justin Ross with some gadget plays to Kadarius Toney thrown in and a decent second campaign from Sky Moore, then he's going to be the MVP. The Chiefs are going to fend off this just furious onslaught from the Ravens, the Bengals, the Bills in the postseason. They're going to make it again. We're going to get Jameson Williams finally deciding to turn his professional career around, and the Lions making a push down the stretch. They win the NFC North. They go in as underdogs, but they pull off what the Bengals did a couple of years ago. They upset the 49ers. They upset the Philadelphia Eagles, the team they played well against last season. We get a 60-yard touchdown pass to Williams on one of the final plays, the final drive, as teams are trying to stop Gibbs. The team in this question would be the Eagles. They're trying to stop Gibbs. They're trying to stop Laporta over the middle. They're bracketing Amon-Ra. They lose Williams deep. Jared Goff to his second Super Bowl, where they do fall to the Kansas City Chiefs.
Wild scenes. But Shawn, if that comes through, and that will be a Shawn Siegele Super Bowl with the Chiefs and the Lions. So we'll see what happens there. But hopefully everyone has enjoyed us talking through some of these kind of predictions, thoughts, and I think it's been a lot of fun to do. So hopefully people have enjoyed listening in. If you do enjoy listening in, make sure you drop us a written review on your favorite podcast app. We would appreciate that greatly. And the one thing we want to do is wish you all the best of luck ahead of this week's games. Go get that win in week one. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. My co-host is Shawn Siegele. Check out all of Shawn's work up on rotoviz.com. And until we are back, have a good one.